expiring tax cuts. You can follow Senate debate on C-SPAN 2 with a procedural vote on the Democratic tax cut proposal set for 2:15 Eastern. Now live to the House floor here on C-SPAN.
The House will be in order. Prayer will be offered by our chaplain, Father Conroy.
Let us pray. We give you thanks, O God, for giving us another day. As we begin the 15th year since that terrible day, we ask your blessing once again upon the families of Officer Jacob Chestnut and Detective John Gibson. We ask as well that your protection on the entire Capitol Police Corps who mourn the loss of their brothers in uniform. Thank you for calling them all to their lives of service. Please hear our prayers for the members of this assembly upon whom the authority of government is given. Help them to understand the tremendous responsibility they have to represent both their constituencies and the people of this great nation of ours. This is a great but complex task. Grant them as well the gift of wisdom to sort through what competing interests might exist, to work a solution that can best serve all of the American people. Finally, give each member peace and equanimity, and give all Americans generosity of heart to understand that governance is not simple but difficult work, at times requiring sacrifice and forbearance. May all that is done within the people's house this day be for your greater honor and glory. Amen.
The Chair has examined the journal of the last day's proceedings and announces to the House his approval thereof. Pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 1, the journal stands approved. The Pledge of Allegiance today will be led by the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. McIntyre.
We'd like to gather to join with us. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The Chair will entertain up to 15 requests for 1-minute speeches on each side of the aisle. For what purpose does the gentleman from South Carolina rise? Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, defense sequestration is a very real danger that will threaten our national security, put our brave men and women in uniform at risk, and destroy up to 1 million jobs across our country. Sadly, the President avoids action on this extremely important issue. House Armed Services Committee Chairman Buck McKeon has recently been quoted in the Politico saying, quote, "We're overdue for guidance from the administration on how they interpret the law and plan to interpret sequestration mechanically," end of quote. Last May, House Republicans voted to prevent sequestration by passing legislation which replaces these drastic defense cuts while maintaining a strong national defense. Additionally, 1 week ago today, the House passed Sequestration Transparency Act with an overwhelming bipartisan vote, 414-2, which holds the administration accountable for these cuts. I urge the President and Senate to act before it's too late and hundreds of thousands of hardworking Americans lose their jobs. In conclusion, God bless our troops, and we will never forget September 11th and the global war on terrorism.
Gentleman yields back for what purpose? Gentleman from Ohio, rise.
Madam Speaker, the question is to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection.
On a day Congress will decide whether to audit the Fed, the Washington Post reports that the New York Fed did not communicate in key meetings with top regulators that British bank Barclays had admitted to Fed staffers that it was rigging LIBOR, the index which sets interest rates worldwide. The Fed wants to be spared a full audit. They want monetary deliberations private. Then they use that privacy shield to keep irregularities from regulators and from congressional view, exposing investors and consumers to massive losses. Of course the Fed wants to continue a system where there's no transparency, no accountability, where they can cover up manipulations of markets and interest rates. But should we endorse this system? When things fall apart, who do the banks come to clean up the mess? Congress. The Fed creates trillions out of nothing and gives it to banks. Congress is in the dark. The Fed sets the stage for the subprime meltdown. Congress is in the dark. The Fed takes a dive on LIBOR. Congress is in the dark. The Fed doesn't tell regulators what's going on. Congress is in the dark. It's time to bring the Fed into the sunshine of accountability. Vote for the audit.
It's expired. What purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania rise? Without objection.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to bring attention to recent attacks by the Boko Haram terrorist group in Nigeria. Attacks in Nigeria's Plateau State on July 7th and 8th left 198 families displaced, 88 people dead, and 187 houses burnt. On July 8th, in the mass funeral for the victims, they were attacked. Two serving members of the National Assembly, Gayandang Tong and Gayandal Fulani, were also killed. Boko Haram took credit for the attacks, stating in their release that Christians, quote, will not know peace again, end quote, if they do not accept Islam. Madam Speaker, these attacks are acts of terrorism performed by a terrorist group against innocent Christians. It's time the State Department label Boko Haram for what it is, a foreign terrorist organization. We must not be afraid to identify and confront attacks of terrorism wherever they might be. Our prayers are with the innocent victims as they mourn the loss of their loved ones. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from New York rise? Without objection.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. On February 12, 2009, Flight 3407 crashed into a house in my district, killing all the passengers and an individual in his home. Out of that devastation arose a spirit that actually united this Congress in enacting flight safety and pilot training rules that would have prevented the crash. The families never gave up and are eagerly awaiting the final implementation of those potentially life-saving rules. Sounds like a happy ending, doesn't it? And yet this week, because the House Rules Committee refused to allow my amendment to protect those specific rules, we are at risk of losing all those hard-fought bipartisan safety reforms. With the so-called Regulatory Freeze Act, these reforms would simply die. So those who voted for them in the past now call them job-killing. I call them people-saving. Listen, I know we need to end overburdensome regulations on small businesses and farmers. I get it. But there's a common-sense way to do it. But to freeze all government regulations, all of them, regardless of the health and safety of our citizens, is over the top, even for this town. This only proves that Washington has broke it, and we need to fix it. This country deserves a better Congress. Thank you. I yield back the balance.
Gentlewoman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Arkansas rise?
Unanimous consent to address the House.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today to recognize the Mountain Home AAA 11-year-old baseball team for winning the Global World Series Championship earlier this year. During the 4-day 24-team tournament, the Mountain Home Bomb Squad suffered a first-round loss but went on to win 6 straight games. In the championship game, they defeated the Missouri Wildcats 10-1. This championship was a great source of pride for the entire Mountain Home Arkansas community. I'd like to commend the team manager, Dr. Eric Arp, coaches Tony Dibble and George Sitkowski for their leadership on the 11 and under Global World Series Championship. Additionally, I'd like to recognize players Garrett Steelman, Austin Mize, Clayton McManus, Luke Dibble, Sam Arp, Bradley Ludwig, Austin Helms, Luke Jackson, Jordan Anderson, Will Sitkowski, and Luke Cruz for their leadership as well. Now that the Bomb Squad has brought a Global World Series trophy home to Mountain Home, I have no doubt that the players will set new, even higher goals to achieve. Congratulations once again to the Mountain Home Bomb Squad and the entire Mountain Home community for their Global World Series victory. Yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from California rise? Without objection.
Few things are as sacred as the right to vote. Generations have fought, bled, and died so that you and I can have a voice in our democracy. This is why we must guard against measures that take this away, like the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, which prohibited all Chinese immigrants from becoming naturalized citizens so that they would not be able to vote. It lasted 60 years until 1943, preventing people who'd lived in this country for decades from exercising their voices. Laws like this, poll taxes, or literacy tests should be a thing of the past in America. Every U.S. citizen, no matter what their background, should have access to the polls. But today, state governments across the country are enacting laws making it much harder for as many as 5 million Americans to vote, requiring, for instance, photo IDs for grandmothers who voted for years but no longer drive. When barely half of Americans vote, we should not be erecting more barriers to democracy. We should be removing obstacles. We must protect the right to vote.
Gentlewoman's time has expired. For what purpose? Gentleman from Michigan rise. Illinois, pardon me.
Request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. On Monday, I co-hosted a jobs fair in the western suburbs of Chicago with several of my colleagues. Over 1,500 job seekers showed up. I visited with more than 100 Northern Illinois business owners since I entered Congress. In each factory tour and office visit, I asked, what would it take for you to create one more job? Just to hire one more person? The answer is always the same: cut red tape. The reality is 60 to 80% of all new jobs come from small businesses. Red tape throws an unfair burden on small businesses and paralyzes job creators. It has led to the least number of business startups in decades. There's a reason we focus so much on rolling back red tape here in the House. It's jobs. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose? The gentlewoman from New York rise. Without objection.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today to raise awareness of a Group A staph infection. A series of traffic events within my district have brought this pressing health situation to my attention. One of my constituents, Stephen Sweetman, a dedicated fireman, contacted my office after the deaths of his mother and his 2-year-old son. Sean died just days after originally presenting with invasive staph A symptoms last February. After flying to New York for Sean's wake, Mr. Sweetman's mother died of Group A staph infection just 14 days after her grandson. Both were originally misdiagnosed with a stomach bug. While medical diagnosis presents enormous challenges, especially for rare diseases, I am deeply concerned with the medical misidentifications which led to these terrible deaths. Recently, several of my colleagues and I sent a letter to the Appropriations Committee asking that we focus on this issue. I hope that we can come together to raise awareness for Group A staph infections. Thank you very much, and I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back. For what purpose? The gentleman from Florida rise. Without objection.
Madam Speaker, the Congressional Budget Office came out with its report yesterday, their latest analysis of the President's health bill. And what confirms is there's flaws in the law. CBO reports that $1.6 trillion program will cost individuals and businesses $5 billion more than was initially estimated. CBO says that the health premiums that they already predicted would increase by $2,100 now will increase even more. CBO estimates that 11 million people who currently have employer-based coverage will simply lose their health plan. The President said we could keep our coverage, but under the law, employers are dropping coverage and premiums are simply increasing, which drives up the cost of health care for everyone. And remember, this historically, the CBO greatly underestimates their analyses. We need to repeal this law and replace it with common sense solution that simply increase competition in the marketplace and places the consumer, not the government, in charge of health care.
Expired. For what purpose? The gentleman from New York rise. Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, an alarming number of former employees of Bethlehem Steel in western New York are now suffering from cancer and other diseases due to radiation exposure as a result of having unknowingly worked with and around uranium during the Cold War. After a multi-year fight, and thanks to the determination of workers and their families, those who were employed at the site from 1949 to 1952 are eligible for $150,000 in compensation for their injuries. However, the cutoff at 1952 is arbitrary because no serious mitigation was undertaken until 1976. Mr. Speaker, those workers should also be eligible for just compensation. I am working with our senators to urge the Centers for Disease Control and the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health to meet with these workers, hear their stories, and finally grant them eligibility for just compensation. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back for what purpose? Gentleman from Mississippi rise. Without objection.
Madam Speaker, President Obama's failed economic policies have brought us more than 41 months of consecutive record unemployment. My state of Mississippi and the nation are starving for jobs. In Mississippi, we like jobs, and we want more jobs, not less. However, this president has been AWOL, absent without leadership, when it comes to protecting and providing for our economic and national security, both of which are under assault by this president and the do-nothing Democrats in the Senate. What keeps me up at night is the fear of sequestration. Sequestration, if allowed to go into effect, is irreversible, irresponsible, and will cost America 1 to 2 million jobs. Sequestration will affect every community in every state in the nation for the worse. Our economic and national security is symbiotic of one another. We must have a strong economy to provide for our national defense and a strong military to protect our economy. The American people do not want this administration to harm our economic and national security any more than it already has. Stop sequestration now. I say to the President, it is time to lead, follow, or get out of the way. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. Members are reminded to direct their remarks to the Chair, and for what purpose does the gentleman from Rhode Island rise?
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent.
Without objection.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to honor a superb public servant, Dr. Donna Ottaviano, who has served as the superintendent of schools for the town of North Providence since 1981. Families in North Providence have benefited greatly from Dr. Ottaviano's experience, dedication, and leadership. The entire school district, including faculty, staff, students, and parents, are sad to see her leave. Access to a quality public education is a cornerstone of ensuring that our country and my home state of Rhode Island will succeed in the years ahead. Making sure our young people have access to the best education possible is critical. I know that Dr. Ottaviano's vast experience, extraordinary dedication, and professionalism will serve her well in her new position with the East Bay Educational Collaborative and benefit Rhode Island schools from Newport to Woonsocket. I congratulate Dr. Ottaviano on her new appointment, wish her well, and thank her for her dedicated service. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back for what purpose? Gentleman from Virginia rise. Without objection.
Madam Speaker, I join my colleagues this morning to sound the alarm of a serious threat facing our country, one that has been addressed by this body and now awaits action by the Senate and the President. It is not an external threat, but one that is totally within our control. Known as sequestration, this sharp, severe cut to our defense budget can and must be stopped. The warnings of from the Secretary of Defense and each of our service chiefs must be heeded. The Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Greenert, described it this way. He said the cuts would do severe and irreversible damage to our Navy. Madam Speaker, where is the President's outrage at this prospect? Where is his leadership in his role as Commander-in-Chief? The House passed legislation which would stop the cuts. My amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act requires the Senate to address it head-on. Madam Speaker, we've led. I truly believe that. We've taken action to stop the cuts. The irrefutable truth is that the same is not true of the Senate and the administration. Now, we have time to do what is right, but that time is short. I call on the President and the Senate to do what is right, to lead by example, to bring us together as a nation to stop the cuts. We must look to the future and shape the future, not look behind us. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from California rise? Without objection.
Madam Speaker, the American people need a tax plan that will help grow the middle class and create jobs right here in the United States. The American people want jobs to take care of their families. Sadly, the Republicans are holding the tax break for 98% of the American hostages so that they can prevent billionaires and billionaires from paying their fair share of taxes. The Bush tax for the ultra-rich has failed, I state, has failed to create any new jobs. They must be allowed to expire. But instead of working together, I state, instead of working together on a bipartisan tax plan to straighten our economy, Republicans are pushing for a plan to balance the budget on the backs of seniors, in the middle class, and then Medicare as we know it by turning it into a private voucher system. Congress must stop protecting billionaires at the expense of Medicare in the middle class. Let's work together. Let's work together on a bipartisan plan that will cut taxes for 98% of Americans, protect Medicare, and create jobs right here in the United States. I yield back to balance my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania rise?
Madam Speaker, request
without objection.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, as co-chair of the Career and Technical Education Caucus, I rise to recognize Mr. Carson Baird for his retirement from Penn State University's Learning Factory. Carson Baird's background in motorsports started in racing while proudly serving in the United States Army. Following his service, he went on to hold the International Motorsports Association Championship, 3 manufacturer championships, and 3 driver championships, having raced in classics such as the 24 Hours of Daytona and the 24 Hours of Le Mans. Since 1994, Carson Baird has served as supervisor of the Learning Factory, supporting the mission to bring the real world into the classroom by providing engineering students with hands-on experience through industry-sponsored projects. Carson Baird helped oversee an expansion of the Learning Factory that doubled its size, and in 2006 it was part of a team honored with the National Academy of Engineering's Gordon Prize for Innovations in Engineering Education. Carson Baird has applied his motorsports background to assist nearly 700 students on 150 projects that spans 13 majors and engaged students in 5 colleges. I commend Mr. Carson Baird on his vision and dedication to tomorrow's engineers and wish him the best in his retirement. And I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina rise?
Permission to speak and revise
without objection.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, as founder of the Congressional Caucus on Youth Sports, I rise to commemorate the National Youth Sports Week we celebrate and to recognize 50 million children who participate in youth sport. It's fitting this year that National Youth Sports Week falls on the eve of the Summer Olympic Games because many Olympians like Andy Roddick, Misty May Traynor, Ryan Lochte, Sonia Richards-Ross all began their careers as young athletes. Sports can make a difference in a child's life. Student athletes make better grades, get in less trouble, and are less likely to be obese. Sports can build character and teach values like sportsmanship, teamwork, civility, respect, and discipline. And we cannot recognize the players without thanking the coaches and volunteers who mentor these kids. Folks like my Chief of Staff, Dean Mitchell, my pastor, who is here today, Matt Rich, with whom my son Stephen has coached, and all the many others who give their time and their efforts to help our young people. Not all youth athletes grow up to be Olympians, but youth sports can shape the lives of all of us and make us better citizens, whatever our calling in life. May God grant that none of us are ever too busy to help a child. And I leave you with a final thought. Go, Team USA. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida rise? Without objection.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I spent 22 years of active duty service in the United States Army. One of the things that seriously concerns me is this dark specter that hangs over our country right now that is called sequestration. That would mean that we will hollow out our military force. We would have the smallest ground force since 1940, smallest Navy since 1915, the smallest fighter aircraft that we've ever had since the creation of the modern United States Air Force. This morning at the Army Aviation Caucus breakfast, I sat between 2 distinguished flyers. One was the commander of the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, another Chief Warrant Officer 4. Between the 2 of them, they had almost 40 deployments into combat zones. But also at that breakfast this morning was a former cadet of mine, now Lieutenant Colonel Dave Almquist, a distinguished master aviator in the United States military. Our men and women are watching us, the men and women that are the best and brightest that this country can produce. But as well, our enemies are watching us to see what we will do to our United States military. Let us learn the lessons from post-World War I, post-World War II, and post the Korean War. Let's not gut our United States military. Let's own up to our responsibilities in Article 1, Section 8. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose the gentleman from Indiana rise?
Permission to address the House.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise today to request the House of Representatives be allowed to vote on the 2012 Farm Bill. With many of the provisions of the previous Farm Bill set to expire on September 30th and only 13 legislative days scheduled between now and then, we cannot afford delay. Our farmers face an incredible amount of uncertainty, whether it's from Mother Nature or market prices. We cannot allow this Congress to be another cause for concern. Farmers in Indiana and throughout our country don't have time for political games. They have a nation and a world to feed, and an economy that relies on them to be all-star performers and to increase productivity every single year. Mr. Speaker, bring the Farm Bill to the floor now. If not, let's stay here through all of August, all of September, all of October, all of November, and all of December until we get this work done. There is no excuse for not having a vote on the Farm Bill. We need a Farm Bill now. Madam Speaker, I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired, and the chair would remind members that they are to address remarks to the chair. Now, for what purpose does the gentlewoman from Oregon rise? Without objection.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Madam Speaker. This is an important week for the United States as we host the International AIDS Conference for the first time in 22 years. Decades ago, our country made the shameful decision that no one who's HIV positive could enter our borders. With the President's lifting of that ban and greater attention to the AIDS crisis, along with the advent of drugs that help those with HIV live longer, we are approaching what we should have always been, a global leader in the fight against AIDS. Countless Oregonians have been affected by AIDS. I've personally lost friends to AIDS. And as of June 30, more than 5,600 people in Oregon were living with HIV. It's time to eliminate the stigma associated with HIV/AIDS, focus on prevention, treatment, and care. The participants at the conference this week show immense dedication to the fight against HIV and AIDS, both in the U.S. and abroad. Congress should have the same dedication. Funding for prevention and treatment programs is crucial, as is funding for medical research and drug development. We've come a long way, but there's still a lot of work to do. I urge my colleagues to join me. Speak out, help to end the stigma. Let's work together to fight AIDS. And
Gentlewoman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Minnesota rise? Without objection.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today to honor Southern Minnesota's own Hormel Foods for 75 years of producing its world-renowned iconic product, Spam. Entrepreneur George Hormel opened up his meat processing plant in 1891 in Austin, Minnesota, but it was his son Jay who came up with the idea of canned spiced ham. Thus, in 1937, Spam was born. Spam served an essential role during World War II. Over 100 million pounds of Spam was sent to the European front to aid the war efforts. After the war, Spam's popularity soared globally. Over 7 billion cans have been sold. Since its inception of Spam, Hormel has always kept their company's roots in southern Minnesota, providing thousands of good-paying jobs and economic stability for middle-class folks in Austin. Hormel also has a rich history of giving back. They partnered with organizations to provide food for malnourished children around the world, and in partnership with the University of Minnesota and the Mayo Clinic, they opened the world-renowned Hormel Institute that gave us omega-3 and 6 fatty acids in cancer reduction. Spam's an important part of our history. It played an essential role in feeding our troops, creating jobs, and has become an iconic American product. So today, I honor Hormel's past and look forward to their future. Happy 75th birthday, Spam. I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from New York rise? Without objection.
Madam Speaker, there seems to be some misunderstanding on the other side of the aisle on the tax cuts that the Democrats are now proposing. Yes, we want to cut taxes for the middle class. We think that it is critical for our economic recovery. We also want to cut taxes for everyone else, including the most fortunate, but only on the first $250,000 of their earnings. On that portion of their earnings, they will receive the exact same tax cut as the middle class. But if we hope to seriously address the issue of long-term deficits and debt, we can't do it by spending cuts alone. According to the nonpartisan fact-checking organization, factcheck.org, in 2009, federal tax rates were the lowest level in 30 years. So let's make one of those hard choices the other side of the aisle likes to talk about. Let's extend the middle-class tax breaks, but let the tax cuts for the most fortunate expire, and use every bit of that revenue to help pay down the deficit and get our economy moving in the right direction. Thank you.
Gentlewoman's time has expired. What purpose does the gentleman from Florida rise? Without objection.
Madam Speaker, keeping our nation safe is our most important responsibility under the Constitution as members of Congress. When we talk about sequestration, we're really asking, are we really going to shirk that responsibility? Are we really going to cut national defense and force our country to grow weaker and weaker over the next 10 years? If we don't prevent these massive cuts, we'll be left with our smallest ground forces since 1940, fewest ships since 1915, and our smallest air force in our history. Our Secretary of Defense says these cuts would be devastating and would seriously damage readiness. Does anything else we really do here matter if we knowingly let our defenses down? If we aren't ready to be able to defend ourselves? If there's wasteful spending in the Pentagon budget that we could cut without impacting national security, then we should do so. I led the fight to kill the extra engine for the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter program, saving taxpayers billions of dollars. The White House doesn't dispute the impact of these cuts, but won't put forward an alternative. The Majority Leader of the Senate won't schedule a vote on the House bill, but won't introduce a plan either. We have to do something to avoid these massive cuts to keep our country safe. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield.
Gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Minnesota rise? Without objection.
Madam Speaker, state legislators all across the country are passing photo ID laws that could strip millions of Americans of their right to vote. Students, communities of color, low-income individuals, and seniors are particularly at risk of being disenfranchised. Just one example, in March this year, a World War II veteran in Tennessee was denied the right to vote because he did not have an ID that matched his assisted living address. In Minnesota, which is considering a misguided constitutional amendment on photo ID, 215,000 registered voters don't have a driver's license or ID card with a current address on it. And if it passes, it'll disenfranchise all of them. Why put these hundreds of thousands of voters at risk? Well, proponents claim fraud, but there's not any fraud. The voter fraud is already illegal, and the number of confirmed cases is insignificant statistically. There are only a tiny number of cases, and for this we're going to disenfranchise literally millions of people? Thank you.
Gentleman's time has expired. Purposes, gentleman from Florida rise. Without objection.
Madam Speaker, we all know that wearing sunscreen, quitting smoking, or steering clear of asbestos can reduce our cancer risk. Yet carcinogens are all around us, and exposure to these cancer-causing agents can be found in everyday products and in the food we eat. For the most part, consumers are kept in the dark, with no way to know for sure whether the makeup they use or the food they eat contains known carcinogens. It's time to help consumers choose safer products for themselves and for their loved ones. And that's why today I'm introducing the Cancer-Free Label Act. My bill will give companies the chance to market to consumers the fact that the products that they make are free of carcinogens. Just as consumers who refuse to buy baby products laden with BPA nearly wipe this chemical from the shelves, the Cancer-Free Label Act will use market-driven forces to drive change. By passing the Cancer-Free Label Act, we can give families across America the opportunity to avoid cancer-causing agents, and by promoting healthier choices, we will even be able to save lives. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia rise? Without objection.
Revise my extend remarks. Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the moment of silence that we extended the victims of the Aurora, Colorado massacre yesterday. But the more telling silence is this body's refusal to address the issue of gun control. And as a result, a comparable number of Americans will be killed by firearms every day. Today's the anniversary of the shooting deaths of 2 of our Capitol policemen, and we responded to those killings with remorse and even more heartfelt condolences after our colleague Gabby was shot. But 60 more multiple murders have been committed since then. 32 innocent students at Virginia Tech were massacred, and Virginia's legislative body actually weakened the state's gun control laws, suggesting that the fault was with the students because they weren't carrying firearms themselves. A similar comment was made by a member of this body that there should have been a shootout in that darkened theater. This is domestic terrorism, Mr. Speaker, and we ought to stop being so soft on such crime. If this shooting had been committed by foreign terrorists, we'd send the Marines out after them. But then foreign terrorists don't buy their weapons from dealers who are members of the NRA. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman's time has expired. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the Chair will postpone further proceedings today on the motion to suspend the rules on which a recorded vote or the yeas and nays are ordered, or on which the vote incurs objection under Clause 6 of Rule 20. Any record vote on the postponed question will be taken later. And for what purpose does the gentleman from Washington seek recognition?
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 6168.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 6168, a bill to direct the Secretary of the Interior to implement the proposed final Outer Continental Shelf oil and gas leasing program 2012 through 2017 in accordance with the Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act and other applicable law.
The Chair would like to remind all persons in the gallery that they are here as guests of the House and that any manifestation of approval or disapproval of proceedings is in violation of the rules of the House. So, pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Washington, Mr. Hastings, and the gentlewoman from Massachusetts, Ms. Zongas, will each control 20 minutes. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Washington.
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on the bill under consideration.
Without objection.
I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Madam Speaker, the bill we are now considering, H.R. 6168, is a very simple bill. It would implement President Obama's proposed offshore drilling lease plan for the years 2012 to 2017. Late yesterday, the House debated H.R. 6082, the congressional replacement of President Obama's energy-restricting and job-limiting offshore drilling plan. These bills contain 2 distinctly different offshore drilling plans, and the House will have an opportunity to choose as to which one allows for more American energy production and more American job creation, and which one continues to lock up America's resources. This debate is occurring during the 60-day mandatory review period provided for under Section 18 of the Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act, which requires that a president to submit his proposed budget plan proposed plan to Congress for review, he must submit it to Congress before it can take effect. This 60-day clock started ticking on June 28th when President Obama's plan was submitted to the House and to the Senate. Now, Madam Speaker, I am the official sponsor of this bill to implement President Obama's plan. I introduced this bill with the specific purpose of allowing the People's House to officially go on record as either endorsing the President's plan or registering its opposition to it. Now, while I am the bill's sponsor, I am going to vote against this bill. I oppose the President's plan. It's a giant step backwards for American energy production and for job creation. Madam Speaker, President Obama likes to give speeches claiming support for offshore drilling. However, I've observed his actions while in office are 180 degrees different than his rhetoric. When President Obama was sworn into office in January 2009, nearly all of our offshore areas were newly opened for American energy production. This is the result of the public outrage in the summer of 2008 over $4 gasoline prices, and that resulted in the federal government lifting the 2 moratoria that blocked energy production on both the Atlantic and the Pacific coasts. The will of the American people was clear. For the sake of family budgets, for small businesses, and for our economy, we must produce more American energy in America to lessen our dependence on hostile foreign sources. So when President Obama took office, there was an offshore energy plan to conduct lease sales in the new areas that were lifted after the moratoria were lifted, that were no longer under the moratoria. Instead of seizing this opportunity to vastly increase American energy production, the President tossed that plan aside and delayed and canceled lease sales, including a sale scheduled for 2011 that would open a section offshore of the Commonwealth of Virginia. The Obama administration has spent the last 3.5 years slowly writing a plan that takes our country backwards, a plan that effectively reimposes the drilling moratoria that was lifted in 2008. The President's plan keeps 85% of our offshore areas off limits to energy production. The Atlantic coast, the Pacific coast, and parts of the Arctic are all kept under lock and key under his plan. His plan absolutely opens no new areas for drilling. As an example, after delaying the Virginia lease sale in 2011, the President doesn't even include it in his proposed plan. Under President Obama, then, the absolute earliest that the Virginia lease sale could happen is 2017. That's 6 years after it was scheduled to take place. In total, the President's proposed plan only includes 15 lease sales. According to the nonpartisan Congressional Research Service, this means that this President has the distinction of offering the lowest number of lease sales over a 5-year plan since this program began, since this legislation establishing the review. Madam Speaker, that's worse than even Jimmy Carter's record. During the several hours debate yesterday, there was little defense of the President's limited and weak offshore plan. In fact, a great deal of time was expended by the other side trying to change the subject, rather than endorse or defend the President's offshore plan. I think that shows just how out of touch and unacceptable this plan really is. Today, we will hear the deliberately misleading claim that the President's proposed plan opens 75% of the known offshore resources. That is simply not true, Madam Speaker. It was meant to provide political cover for a failed record of offshore drilling. The cold, hard facts are the President is effectively reimposing a moratorium on 85% of our potential resources offshore of America's coast. An attempt might be made to claim that the bill doesn't represent the President's plan. Madam Speaker, it couldn't be more black and white. The bill exactly replicates the offshore lease sale scheduled in the President's proposed plan, both by location and by the sale year. H.R. 6168 is the President's plan. Now, just last week, Secretary of Interior Salazar wrote that President Obama's offshore plan is what the, and I quote, American people have asked for, end quote. In reality, the American people want increased American energy production and new and more American jobs. The President's proposed plan fails to deliver on both American energy production and American jobs. So by voting against this bill, which I will do, even though I am the sponsor of it, members of Congress can stand up for the American people and reject the President's no new drilling, no new job plan. We can and we must do better, and that is precisely why we had the debate and will have a vote later on today on H.R. 6082, the House plan. So with that, Madam Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of this time. Gentlewoman from Massachusetts.
Madam Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentlewoman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank our ranking member, Mr. Markey, for his forceful advocacy on this issue. I rise today in strong support of H.R. 6168, legislation that would support the President's proposed offshore drilling lease sale plan for 2012 to 2017. This plan, which has been developed over the past few years with extensive public input, is a responsible way to increase domestic production of oil and gas while still protecting our delicate and vital ocean environment. Contrary to Republican claims that the plan would restrict domestic production and hurt jobs, the President's proposed plan would actually open 75% of offshore oil and gas resources to development. Where there are resources, the land is being opened, 75%. In fact, domestic production of oil is at an 18-year high, and gas is at an all-time high under President Obama. At the same time that the President's plan includes new leasing, it also protects many of our most important ocean environments from drilling, such as Georges Bank and other vital fishing areas off the coast of my state, Massachusetts. Georges Bank is a valuable public resource that has been central to our region's rich cultural heritage, economy, and identity. For years, these waters have been at the heart of the New England fishing industry and have historically been one of the country's most productive fishing grounds. Income from Massachusetts fisheries has been valued at approximately $350 million annually, and Georges Bank is a key part of this marine ecosystem. Allowing oil and gas drilling on Georges Bank would threaten to destroy these rich fishing grounds and could have a devastating effect on the Massachusetts economy. But the benefits of the President's responsible plan go well beyond just protecting Massachusetts. This plan would also protect Bristol Bay in Alaska from drilling. Bristol Bay, as many know, is one of Alaska's most pristine fishing grounds and the source of much of the salmon that we consume here in the United States. The decision to keep these areas off limits was based on local recommendations and a lack of infrastructure and oil spill preparedness. If we open this fishing ground to oil drilling, the impact could be felt across our country. The Republican plan would also require just one environmental review for every new lease offered in the Atlantic, Pacific, or Bristol Bay, without taking into account the uniqueness of each of these locations. While I certainly understand the desire to streamline these reviews, requiring one blanket review for the entire country is not the answer. The harsh climate of Alaska is infinitely different than that of the Gulf of Mexico or the Gulf of Maine. It is important to know the conditions of each site before drilling is started, or we could face another disaster like the 2010 BP Deepwater Horizon spill, from which the Gulf Coast states are still recovering. So I call upon my colleagues to support the President's responsible offshore leasing plan and vote in favor of H.R. 6168. Our support of the President's plan is support for the fishermen in Massachusetts and throughout the United States. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlewoman reserves the balance of her time. Gentleman from Washington.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'm very pleased to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Colorado, a member of the Natural Resources Committee and a subcommittee chairman. 3 minutes.
Gentleman from Colorado is recognized for 3 minutes.
I thank this Chairman. Madam Speaker, this bill we are considering under suspension simply codifies President Obama's offshore drilling plan for the next 5 years. It's a simple bill and a simple vote. What do you choose for America's future? The Congressional Replacement Plan we debated yesterday will harness America's vast offshore resources in both existing and new areas in a responsible way. Our plan is the right plan to keep the United States competitive and to develop the resources that American families and American businesses need. It will generate more revenue for the taxpayers, more energy, and more jobs. What does the Obama plan under this suspension vote have to offer? No new areas for energy development and the lowest number of lease sales in the history of the 5-year program, according to Congressional Research Service. Is that really the plan you think is best to move our nation forwards and generate high-paying jobs? Look at this bar graph. This shows what was going on under President Jimmy Carter 30 years ago. And this 5-year plan program has been going for more than 30 years. And the 15 lease sales you see at the end of the graph is the lowest in the history of the 5-year program. And if you remember Jimmy Carter, we had gasoline shortages. You could go to the gas station and buy gas if your license plate ended in an odd number or an even number, depending on what day of the week it was. So we should not have the lowest number of lease sales in the history of our country. The Obama 5-year plan is the you cannot build it plan. You cannot build new infrastructure for energy. It tells the people of Virginia, that they cannot build new rigs and explore new areas of the Outer Continental Shelf regardless of the bipartisan support of the governor, senators, and representatives of Virginia. The President's plan says you cannot build anything new, essentially reinstating a moratorium on the Pacific and Atlantic Outer Continental Shelf. The President's plan locks up 85% of our nation's nearly 2 billion acres of OCS resources. Production on federal lands, according to the Energy Information Administration, is down under the Obama administration. I heard something earlier about natural gas production is up. That's on private land primarily because of fracking. We need to get federal lands producing again, and the Obama 5-year plan is not the plan to do that. The Congressional Replacement Plan is. We should vote for more American energy and vote for more American jobs. So vote against this suspension bill and vote in favor of the Congressional Replacement Plan. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I yield back.
Gentleman's time's expired. For what? Gentlewoman from Massachusetts.
Madam Speaker, the number of lease sales don't translate into more drilling on these leases necessarily. Oil companies should begin drilling. Oil companies already hold leases in the Gulf of Mexico that are sitting idle that contain nearly 18 billion barrels of oil, according to the Interior Department. Oil companies should begin drilling on those leases before asking to threaten Massachusetts and other coastal states with new drilling. And now I yield as much time as he may consume to the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Moran.
Gentleman from Virginia is recognized for as much time as he may consume.
I thank the chairwoman and I thank my friend and colleague from Massachusetts. Mr. Chairman, in support of President Obama's proposed offshore drilling lease plan, I will vote for this. But I suspect that this bill will garner little support. And that's the reason why it was scheduled for consideration today. But unlike the Republican majority in the House, who favor drilling above all else, and Interior Secretary Salazar and President Obama, they are acting more responsibly in a balanced fashion. Their 5-year leasing plan attempts to balance the full range of public and private interests. Their 5-year leasing plan attempts to ensure that our coastal waters will continue to be a shared public resource. They were never meant to be the exclusive domain of the oil and gas industry. Introducing drilling in new areas will disrupt established industries like commercial fishing and beach tourism. There's no question about that, and there is no need to rush forward and open our entire coast to drilling when 75% of our offshore oil and gas resources are already available for drilling. In fact, more oil is in production today under the Obama administration than at any time during the last 14 years. And more of the public's lands and waters have been leased for drilling today than at any previous time in American history. Onshore, oil companies hold leases on more than 73 million acres of the public's land, though they choose to keep 45 million of those acres inactive. Offshore, more than 37 million acres of the outer continental shelf have been offered for lease since 2012, and though the oil industry has bid on less than 10% of these new available leases. As of June 1st of this year, there were 1,980 rotary drilling rigs operating on U.S. lands and waters, more than all other countries combined. Now, the President's plan does open up areas in the Beaufort and Chukchi Seas off Alaska's northern coast to oil and gas development. I do have strong misgivings that adequate safeguards have been established to respond to a future oil spill disaster in these seas, because drilling will be done in a harsh environment, in a remote area where disaster response capabilities are extremely limited and could be compromised by severe weather conditions, which in fact are the norm up there. But I am in strong agreement that the 2012 to 2017 plan excludes Lease Sale 220 that covers waters in the mid-Atlantic, especially off the coast of Virginia. In addition to commercial fishing interests and tourism, Lease Sale 220 threatens military readiness and our national security interests, and it intersects shipping lanes for the Atlantic's two busiest commercial ports, Hampton Roads and Baltimore. The U.S. Atlantic Fleet is based at the Norfolk Naval Base, and it operates in these very same waters that the President wants to protect. He wisely proposes simply postponing oil and gas development primarily for that purpose. According to a report issued by the Office of the Deputy Secretary of Defense for Readiness, there should be no lease sales in 72% of the proposed 220 lease area, since it's in conflict with live ordnance, air, surface, missile, bomb, and gunnery exercises, shipboard qualification trials, carrier qualifications, and follow-on testing and evaluation. An additional 5% would interfere with aerial operations and shouldn't host permanent surface structures. In summary, 78% of proposed Lease Sale 220 that the President postpones wisely would be in areas that conflict with our national security interests. And a good deal of the remaining 22% would be within the shipping lanes to the ports of Hampton Roads and Baltimore. So, Mr. Chairman, our coastal waters are a shared resource that host a number of competing and sometimes incompatible uses. In the interests of the oil and gas industry, and to perpetuate a myth that somehow we can drill our way to lower gasoline prices and energy independence, the Republican majority is demonstrating a disregard for our other economic interests and the livelihood of millions of Americans that livelihood is needlessly placed at risk in a drilling above all else policy. So I encourage my colleagues to support the President's balanced legislation and reject the other drilling bill that is on the floor today. The President is trying to do the right thing, and he should be supported. The other bill will have unintended, unforeseen, but very adverse consequences to our economy. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Washington.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm very pleased to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Louisiana, a member of a coastal, or a representative of a coastal state and a very important member of the Natural Resources Committee. Mr. Landy, 3 minutes.
Gentleman from Louisiana will be recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Speaker, the rhetoric here just does not meet the facts. Our energy policy in this country has continued to fail us, because we have spent money in areas that are getting us no results. We know that to lower the cost for all Americans, we must lower their energy bills. And we know that the cheapest form of energy out there is oil and gas. And yet the President puts out a bare bones policy, but yet claims to want to create jobs. The lowest unemployment rate in this country exists in North Dakota, And the reason that unemployment is so low there is because they understand that drilling equals jobs. Now, let's see what's going on up in the Dakotas. Because if we would believe what the gentlemen and ladies across the aisle would lead us to believe, is that the areas that we would like to open up do not contain any resources, then they would believe, as the USGS believed in in 2002, that the Marcellus Shale in the Pennsylvania area only contained about 2 trillion cubic feet of gas. Well, today, through the hard work of Americans and private industry, we have realized that there are 84 trillion cubic feet of natural gas. In the Gulf of Mexico, in the 1980s, there was an assessment that believed that only 6.25 billion barrels of oil was located in the Gulf. But yet, today, 15.5 billion barrels have been produced. Now, the problem is that it takes a while for private industry to recognize where these resources are, to be able to find them, to explore for them, and then to determine how much is in the ground. And so that takes time. And so what the President does is he takes those properties, those federal properties off the table. It doesn't allow those companies to go out and explore to determine whether or not we can actually be energy independent, which everyone here on both sides of the aisle continues to come up to these microphones and claim they want. Well, we can do that. And all we're asking in our plan is that we allow these properties to be surveyed and looked at and made available.
I yield the gentleman 2 additional minutes.
And made these properties available so that private industry can come in and to determine the